Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies Podcast. My name is Toby Miller, and my guest today is
Carrie Freeman. I am a professor of communication at Georgia State University in Atlanta, United States of America.
Atlanta, Georgia, which the only time I was there saw me arrive partway through a movie at a film theater because I didn't realize that it was the same time zone as New York, where I just arrived from.
So you were
Very
in the
embarrassing.
wrong time zone for the movie.
In my
Did you make
mind,
sure to make a big scene and walk right in front of everyone?
of course.
Yes, yeah.
Now, Prof, I'm fresh from listening to two episodes of your wonderful podcast, so I want to talk all about that. But prior to that, I want you to answer my banal opening gambit, which is to share with
Okay.
us what's currently dynamizing, impeding, fascinating, interesting, preoccupying you. What's going on for CPF?
Well, because I live in the United States and I try to be a civically engaged citizen, I'm kind of outraged all the time right now because of the Trump administration and just all the cruelty, the violence, the lying, the cheating, the manipulation across so many aspects of our lives. Like it makes it hard for you to just kind of do your job in a normal day where you're already super busy, but then you feel like you have to comment or write your congressperson or post about some immigration issue or I mean it's just relentless, and that's actually the point. And so if you are an activist or somebody who likes to be really engaged, it's rather exhausting, and I think and it becomes paralyzing, which again is the point of flooding us with all these misdeeds and potential illegal actions and things that seem so cruel. And so, in the process of dealing with all this, and we're not even through the first year of the presidency, which is also like I'm wondering how much more destructive can it be? As someone who's currently writing a book on coexisting with wildlife in the United States, I also feel like, is there any room to even talk about that right now? Like, does anybody even care? I mean, it's already an issue that maybe a lot of us, particularly those of us that live in cities, might not really have a super strong interest in talking about wild and free living animals. And then under these circumstances, with so much human exploitation and just the rollback of so many environmental programs, I think it's increasingly difficult to kind of have oxygen for those things, which is why I have tried on my In Tune to Nature podcast, since it's an environmental show, to focus on cuts to the parks department. Like if our federal government is being destroyed and the employees are being demoralized and fired. And so I'm overwhelmed by this. And so then I just think, well, okay, I'm writing about the Parks Department. And so let's also focus on, supporting the Parks Department. So that's kind of where I've focused some of my activities. Um, but again, I still am trying. It's just so overwhelming that it's really difficult. I know the whole world is dealing with the repercussions with tariffs and other things, but I guess I just wanted to let everybody know that a lot of us are really upset and trying to work all the time on this, and even though it's exhausting.
I think it makes a lot of sense, though, to focus on areas where you're an expert, even though I know expertise doesn't matter anymore, and people can blithely pronounce on topics about which they know sweet FA and lie
Yeah.
all the time. But that put us to one side. I do think that speaking of that of which one knows is excellent as part of a
Yeah.
resistance to this nonsense and this
Right.
cruelty, because it's interesting you use that word. That's the word I wake up thinking to myself. Oh,
Oh,
someone's moving behind you on the bed.
yeah. That
Someone's
sounds really
mobile.
provocative, but it is my
Oh,
dog, Elliot,
I, I'm
on
sorry.
radio.
That came
Yes.
out the wrong way because we'd been talking about uh,
Yeah.
our
Our cats and
our
dogs
cats and dogs earlier.
are
The
feline
natural
and canine
segue,
persons in the
yes,
household.
but unfortunately, it did come out slightly unfortunately. Anyway, uh,
He's
there,
my roommate.
Your roomie,
Yeah.
yes. So could we focus a bit on the podcast? As I said, I've just listened to a couple of wonderful episodes you sent to me where you're trying to make wombats talk, which is an achievement in
All
itself.
they do is, yeah, they do talk apparently, but I didn't hear them vocalize. They were just too busy chomping on grass. And so that's all I got. It's an adorable sound. But right, if you want to get a good audio from wildlife, it usually comes in the form of birds and insects. And a lot of the other wild animals don't necessarily make any noise around you, right? So then it was just me kind of sounding like a dumb tourist being so excited to see kangaroos and wombats and describing how cute and fascinating they were. But they're so from an audio perspective, it might not have been that thrilling. But I also take hundreds of pictures too at the same time. So I'm juggling between my camera and the audio and then taking pictures and then sometimes video because it's just so beautiful and thrilling to, especially to be in Australia and see marsupials, which are mammals that we're really not used to over here, except for possums, which I still don't see very many possums.
And Prof, one of the self-deprecating things you do on your podcast when you're out of town is refer to yourself as sort of dumb American, you know,
I
but
don't think I used the word dumb, but I think I said it's a low science knowledge. Like I can't describe what the trees are or which birds, or I tend to describe all insects as either bees or crickets. Like I don't know what species they are. I'm just like a tourist.
but the point is you do it in a charming and very smart way that means that the listener learns a lot without knowledge being used as a truncheon on them. And I think that
For sure.
relates to the point I was making earlier about expertise and how to exercise it rather than wield it, as it were. And
Yeah.
the podcast is terrific, and you come across as a very respectful visitor more than a tourist, I think.
Yeah, I try to be. I mean, some people even differentiate between the notion of tourist versus traveler, and traveler is a more respectful version of a tourist. So I guess I try to be an eco traveler and try to be very thoughtful, even though, of course, it's all hypocritical in the terms of using so many fossil fuels to get from the United States all the way over to Australia and Tasmania in particular. So it's kind of ironic because I'm going over there for an environmental conference. So I get the irony there. So, but while I'm there, I do like to try to be as respectful as I can and to make the most of the experience that I have and then to share it with others. Because then it seems like for the resources I've used, I'm kind of giving back a little bit more. And I definitely, my goal when I'm there and I'm not at the conference is to see as many non-human animals, wild, free-living animals out in their natural environment as I can without bothering them. So that's kind of a delicate balance because I chose not to go to any zoos or sanctuaries where I could have seen a lot more of the kinds of animals like the Tasmanian devil that everyone talks about.
You didn't see the platypus. You see,
I did not. I've been to Australia before and I did see one once in a river. And some other people at our conference saw one in a river near in Hobart, actually. I didn't go on that particular tour, so I missed seeing that little guy. So right, but that also is part of the natural way that when you travel, you can't you're not entitled to see any particular being, right? Like if you do encounter them in some way, you're fortunate, and hopefully you're not bothering them. And so it's kind of happenstance, whether you see them. Although I did go to Maria Island in particular because I was informed that you would see a lot of kangaroos and wallabies and birds and wombats, which was totally true. And so that was fantastic.
and I think a lot of people have a sense of wallabies and kangaroos, and a lot of people are wearing kangaroos because the Australian government
Oh,
had a decades-long sadistic policy of killing them,
yes. I
and
think
they
they used to be in
became
Adidas shoes and just some soccer shoes. The
they,
leather was from. kangaroos. I think most people didn't know that, even though they would assume we had skinned the cows. Although whoever gets skinned for those shoes is not happy about it.
Quite so. So all those animals, but the ones that probably people have never really thought about are wombats. And you give a very acute description of the wombat. And I think at one point you say, you're going to hear me say cute a lot because that
That's
is
what I said when describing
that-
wombat.
that's what I mean. In the podcast episode,
Yeah.
Tasmania, you
Oh,
say
yeah, that's what
when you
I
use
said.
the
Yes,
word
that
cute.
I'm
Yes.
going to say cute a million times. I can't help
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I
I
was kind
think
of
that's
obsessed with them. Yeah.
there's something about their shape and their fascination with digging that is just cute.
They're nice and plump. If you
They're
don't know
plump.
what a wombat is, from a North American perspective, I was describing them as like a beaver without the big tail. Just in terms of what they looked like to me, because that's another thing I was doing in the podcast was constantly referencing everything from an American perspective to talk to my
Yeah,
mostly
sure.
American radio listeners.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so maybe the podcast, isn't for everyone, but just to make things relatable. But they're very furry and kind of plump, and maybe they look like they're about 30 pounds or something, but they have huge claws and big teeth, and they're constantly grazing. They're
Crazy. They look
vegetarian.
like, for me, they're a cross between a huge beaver and a small bear.
Ooh, yes, I could see that. Like a
That's the.
bear cub or something. They're
Uh,
really close to the ground though. Like very short legs.
Now, tell us about the radio show. Tell us about your work
Oh
on
yeah.
real audio.
I'm so I'm so fortunate that when I moved to Atlanta, which is when I first got my job out of when I graduated from University of Oregon, and then I moved out here to Atlanta because actually this is where my parents and my brother live, so I was lucky to get a job at Georgia State University. And then the place where I live, I found out that down the street is a progressive radio station that's a community nonprofit radio station called Radio Free Georgia, and that there was a animal rights radio show called Second Opinion Radio. And so I met the women that did it. We were at like a farm sanctuary walkathon fundraiser. And so I asked them permission to come and observe their show. And then I just kind of kept doing it because it literally is a block from my house and I still live in the same place like 17 years later. So I can walk to the radio station. So I started doing that around 2009 and then it's been weekly ever since. And so I started becoming part of that team on the Second Opinion Radio Animal Rights show with me and Sonia Schwartz and Melody Paris. And I took like the broadcasting class and so I got certified and that was kind of exciting. And then there was a environmental show that was already there. It was called In Tune to Nature. And so I inherited the name. And the woman who ran it, like she moved away and they didn't back then they didn't like the remote thing. This was before the pandemic. So basically she had to give up the show. So Sonia and I kind of moved over and so we would be on both shows, the In Tune to Nature and the Second Opinion Radio. But now it's just me doing In Tune to Nature and then Melody doing Second Opinion Radio, and we kind of switch off in our spot between 6 and 7 p.m., which is great because it's drive time in Atlanta, and so there's got to be thousands of people. Now I don't know if thousands of people are listening, but it is an FM radio station at the bottom of the dial where you find all those non-commercial stations. And so I'm hoping that the random visitor to Atlanta in the rental car kind of ends up listening. So, and I see my In Tune to Nature show as a way to make people more informed and responsible eco-citizens, like, and or I call them human animal earthlings, to give some space to us taking a biocentric or ecocentric view instead of just an anthropocentric, human-centered view of the world and the issues we're facing. And I don't argue with people on the show. I just because I don't invite people to be interviewed if I'm not impressed with what they're doing. So because I just invite somebody who's written a book that I think is really interesting, a scholar, a lot of times just activists working on issues, or like, when, all the firings started happening in the federal government, I knew Christine Johnson was a former park ranger at retired, and so she was able to speak. All the retired park rangers can speak about government issues. And so I got her on the show to tell us what was really happening, in the Park Service and to speak on behalf of the people who couldn't speak. And so it's nice to have a platform like yours, Toby, where it doesn't have to be a sound bite and just so clever like you would if you're talking to the media. You actually have a deep conversation with somebody and they get to really explain the issues and how they're resolving them, and how it always end with how people can get involved. And so trying to end on like a really productive note as well. And I call it also an animal rights environmental show because environmentalism is a pretty broad area, and it can go from, more radical aspects to more conservative and moderate aspects. And so, not everybody that considers themselves an environmentalist also cares as much about individual animals other than humans, and promoting veganism and plant-based eating. And so that's also part of the show.
And I wondered if we could move on to some of these theoretical and academic questions. And one of the things that you, and along with others, are critical of is the human exceptionalism paradigm, a fancy way of saying people think they're not animals when they are.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit about that? Because this is a very profound part of so many cultural norms around the globe, isn't it? The idea
Yeah,
that we are not animals.
right. And I do think it comes from a lot of world religions. I'm not necessarily saying indigenous religions, and those vary greatly too, but a lot of the major world religions do separate out the human and put them closer to the deity or the god. And so a lot of us get cultivated, including me in the United States, that this is more of a human world kind of here for us, and maybe we should be kind stewards, but it's still rather patronizing to the rest of, the species on Earth. But at some point, especially if you have companion animals like we do, and you start recognizing their personalities and you see their thoughts and their emotions, and and the fact that we, are also an animal ourselves, that you recognize there's no real reason to separate ourselves, despite many of the impressive things we can do as humans. It doesn't warrant oppressing all these other animals and exploiting them legally like we do. It's and so that is the basis of everything. And in my communication work, almost all of it is deconstructing the human animal dualism, this
Mhm.
notion that there's humans and then there's animals. And even the language where we might say humans and animals, people and animals. And so, or like I noticed earlier, Toby, that you referred to your cat as a person. So I love that because they do have personalities and they are individuals. And so we could reserve the notion, like I try to, when I'm talking about humans, not just say people, since other animals could be persons. And there's also movements to have legal personhood for other animal beings, because a lot of times in different places around the world, they're legally objects. And so, or they just don't have their own rights. So just the language we use and the concept that we should be reminding us that we're part of the animal kingdom, and not to think that the animal aspects of us should be repressed and that they're the shameful, embarrassing, violent parts of us. Um, I really like Melanie Challenger's book How to Be Animal, because she really celebrates the fact that being animal is what makes us human, and like the fact that we love and that we're social and caring. A lot of these things are common in the animal kingdom, and we should be part of it. Now, we know that because in particular white supremacism has used the notion of animality as a tool, as a weapon to belittle certain groups of humans that they wanted to exploit. And so, since the notion of animality has been weaponized and it's been an insult to humans, it's hard for us in the animal rights movement and the critical animal studies movement in academia to get past that because any comparison between the human animal and other animal species historically has been seen as um, purposely insulting, and so it's difficult to try to empower the word animal and to bring a positive spin to it and to have us see ourselves as allies and embrace our animality and people feeling safe doing that, that they're not going to be dehumanized. It's very difficult, and a lot of scholars work really hard to deconstruct that. But I still find in academia there's it can sometimes still be unwelcome to bring in other animals into a discussion of marginalized or social movements uh, related to humans who are needing liberation themselves.
Prof, you may have heard someone crying in the background.
Is that your roommate?
It would be one of them. One of them is with me. I don't know where the other one is.
Although I can't hear them meowing.
Well, it wasn't a meowing, it was meow,
Okay, like a
like a
howl.
pain thing almost. So
So
I
you're
don't.
walking around looking for her to make sure she didn't get
Well,
stuck.
it's I found her. I can't find him. So Tani is the little girl and Chinguri is the little boy. And
Oh,
Chinguri, he's Basque. And Chinguri is actually an Euskera word,
oh, nice.
i.e. Basque, and it means ant. And I've always found it very odd to name a pussycat after a different species.
Yeah, you said ant, like A-N-T,
Ant,
like the ant.
A-N-T, things,
Yeah.
not the Laturian movement, but
Ant.
the little critters.
Yeah.
I
What
don't know
made
where
you
he is.
pick
I'll just let
that
him.
insect name for him?
Yeah, it's weird, but it's also a beautiful word, Chinguri.
It is. It sounds much
Darling,
better than ant.
where are you? I don't know. Anyway,
I'm watching Toby right now wander around his apartment, but I can't see the apartment because in his background he's got like an ocean. And
it's,
so but he's also bending over, presumably looking under beds and couches
yeah,
for Chingari.
exactly. Um, oh, there he is. Hello,
Oh, good.
darling. He looks fine. He's not stuck anywhere.
He just wants attention.
Bingle.
He wants to
Anyhow,
be on your podcast, and now he is.
getting back to what you were saying, Prof, this also relates to the complexity, and you've written about this too, of the dynamic not only of animal, human, but of nature culture. And the
Right.
idea that we're special because we make semiotic marks. And you can find this littered through Hegel's thinking and used as weaponry by Hegel to defend colonialism,
Mm.
and of course used legally in inverted commas to justify the dispossession of native peoples on the grounds that they didn't build culture in inverted commas. This
Ooh.
is especially tough to do in Latin America, but it's been used nevertheless, especially in places like the United States and Australia, to say you have to have occupied a place, destroyed things,
Mm.
made things that resonate and remain, and created semiosis.
Right. Like in terms of colonialism, if you come over to what is now the United States of America or North America, and you don't see what they consider to be buildings or agriculture
Yeah,
in the same way,
yeah.
even though there was agriculture from the humans here, then you don't recognize it from a capitalist perspective that they own it.
Right,
And
exactly.
so a lot of native human peoples and then the native wild animal communities don't get any credit for their territories and what they've done. And so we just say, oh, we can take it and we're not even stealing when you actually are stealing.
Because you didn't do anything with it. And this gets really interesting. One of my philosophical heroes until recently
Uh-oh.
is David Hume. It was just pointed out somewhere the other day that in a footnote he justifies slavery. So I have to,
There's something incredible. You justify slavery in a footnote.
yeah, well, I've got to find the footnote. But
Yeah, like how dismissive.
Hume says animals reason.
Mhm.
Bentham, as in non-human animals, reason
Yeah.
and they gain knowledge. Bentham says they suffer. And that sort of utilitarian Benthamite argument is a big one historically in favor of animal rights, but I'm not sure animal rights people would want to define themselves as utilitarians.
Yeah, and you don't have to always make the argument that you're just trying to decrease suffering and increase, joy and benefits. Because sometimes it can lead to weird arguments where it's okay to kill a cow so long as they had a good life or something like that. So it's oftentimes it's better to just give more of a rights-based argument or a care-based argument that they have a right to be here. They have a right to their own life. And if you don't absolutely need to save your own life for subsistence reasons to cause harm to them, then you shouldn't be doing that. Like that's basic ethical theory is the minimization of harm, unless harm is like absolutely necessary in some way. And even then that there's all kinds of ways you can define what is necessary. But if you respect someone else and their right to life and right to liberty and freedom that other wild animals should have, or any animals, because also animal rights is a non-domestication belief system, meaning we don't like the idea that you farm somebody or that you tame them to own and breed them so that you can use them as companions or food or research subjects or entertainment in zoos or whatever. So ideally with animal rights, the end goal would be that all animals are have their own cultural communities that they live in that coexist with
Mm.
human communities, and we give to each other, and we have to resolve conflicts and everything that will inevitably happen, but that we're not controlling any animals. Although, side note, whenever there would be some orphaned animals or, animals that we have injured with our cars or whatever, I think there would always be a reason to have some sanctuaries or something where you rehabilitate and take care of certain individuals who couldn't live on their own. But I do think that is very different than farming somebody and owning them and breeding them like we do in almost all countries and make it's a legal kind of oppression and enslavement that just gets overlooked by most people, even very progressive scholars.
And Prof, I wondered if we could now turn to your books specifically, because by this point, I'm sure people, I was going to say licking their lips, but food is one of the big problems that you write about. And perhaps we could start with, if this is okay with you,
Yeah,
framing farming. And
right.
framing farming's subtitle is Communication Strategies for Animal Rights. Could you take us through this book, Prof?
Yeah, this was my dissertation at University of Oregon with Dr. Deborah Mersk, and I know she was on your show. I just recently listened to
She's a
that great,
survivor. She's a
yeah,
survivor. She made it
of your
out the other
show.
side, and you can too.
Oh, I'm almost there. Uh, yeah. So, I was studying. One of the reasons I went into academia is because I used to well, I am an animal rights activist, but I worked at and started like vegetarian groups, just grassroots groups, in addition to my paid job. I would do that as a volunteer. And you always wonder about all this stuff you're handing out to people at a tabling event or something. And like, what should it have on the cover? Should there be a pig behind bars? Should there be a pig who's at a slaughterhouse? Should it just be a happy pig? Should there not be any pig on? Should it just be plant-based food? I mean, or what should we be saying? Like, what's convincing to people? So I used to think I could get into academia and then just figure out how to persuade everybody to stop eating animals, and there is no, I've realized there's no, I don't really like the word persuasion, and I don't consider myself as someone who's doing persuasion per se, but I am into value-based moral arguments and appeals. And so I
Mm,
was looking at five different US animal rights organizations that were working on farm to animal issues,
mm, mm,
including People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals and Farm Sanctuary and Compassion Over Killing and group called Farm and Vegan Outreach. And so I did a content analysis of all that stuff, including like t-shirts and bumper stickers and Meet Your Meat videos and all of that good stuff.
Mhm.
And then I also interviewed the people who were in charge at each of these organizations. And so I was analyzing, okay, how are they? I was using a social movement framing platform, which I do a lot in my books. It's just very simple that the people who study social movement framing say collective action frames contain a problem, a solution, and some kind of motivational or identity component. And so I just looked for those three things in this vegan advocacy or this farm to animal advocacy. And then I also made recommendations because I'm an activist, I like at the end of each paper or book to also tell people what to do. Like, I don't know that they're listening, but I always end with recommendations and not just, I don't like to just problematize things. I like to come up with some solutions. Now, I was very pleased with a lot of the things that these organizations, I like these organizations. I'm on their side in terms of what they're doing, but I also would make recommendations where I was looking for what I was calling ideological authenticity, meaning if you are an animal rights organization, you should put that agenda out there, and that should probably be the basis upon which you build your argument. Because if we in the animal rights movement are not putting forth the idea that we should not be using and abusing other animals needlessly, then if we're not doing that, then probably no one is doing it. And so, but it's different if you're a nutrition organization, then you forward the health argument or whatever. Now, I'm not saying you can't bring in environmental and health arguments or advantages to veganism when you are an animal advocacy group, but I do think you need to lead with what your main cause is. And so my main recommendations there were that the two biggest problems with killing and eating other animals when humans do it is that it's unjust, like it's basically unfair, and it's environmentally unsustainable. Like we don't have enough planets to keep doing this with the billions of humans that we have. And so, and by unjust, it can mean not just to the domesticated animals, but also to the farmed animals, excuse me, to the wild animals who have their forests destroyed because we have to use most of the earth to raise crops or to have pasture land for this one kind of, you know, cow or goat or sheep or chickens, that we have. So, and then the idea would be that you promote a plant-based diet, but you also make it very accessible to many people, affordable, accessible, and that you also work systemically to not have a speciesist society. So like that there are lots of ways that you could frame it. And so to me, the health argument, we shouldn't necessarily problematize health in terms of, oh, eating meat is terrible for your health, but we can make plant-based eating a healthy solution to a problem of unjust and unsustainable food systems.
Oh, absolutely right. In the same way that using, in inverted commas, health to appeal to everyday people makes sense, so does appealing to the horrific conditions for our fellow animals in industrial farming, uh, but also
Exactly.
the terrible circumstances often of human workers in industrial farming.
Yes. That's part of what
Injuries they
you could
sustain.
say
Yeah.
is part of the when you say that killing and raising animals for food is unjust and unsustainable. In the unjust, you can say for the human animal too, for the workers who are mostly in the United States, exploited immigrant workers, and they have an awful situation there. I just interviewed Leah Garces of Mercy for Animals because she's written a book called Transfarmation, not transformation, but Transfarmation, the movement to free ourselves from factory farming. That's a great book for people wanting to have empathy for the farm workers, even for the quote unquote growers who are stuck kind of raising chickens, but they're part of they're in debt to all these corporate agribusiness people. And then she also tells you about the lives of individual in rescued chickens and cows and pigs. So yeah, I thought she did a good job of bringing that in because also people who live around factory farms in rural areas have their whole neighborhoods basically poisoned and their property values uh, go down and it becomes a like a disgusting place to live. It just smells and it's gross. And so there's not many winners in this in the factory farming system that we have that is also heavily subsidized. So it's a kind of corporate welfare in the United States in order to make it more affordable. And then they force off all the costs, the environmental costs, onto governments and communities to clean up. And then the climate crisis is also a big one, in terms of the greenhouse gases emitted, especially methane.
Mm.
So I mean, oh gosh, you're gonna need to stop me because I just love to talk about all the problems. Like it is amazing how awful this animal-based food system is, and that across so many domains of life, like I struggle to think of anything good about it except for a few corporate executives so who are benefiting. So I just think it's insane that we're not talking about this more and that more people are not doing things about it and that our politicians and our like presidential candidates never utter any word about factory farming, almost never even mention the fact that we live in a world with populated by millions of other animals and plants. Like that just is not mentioned at all
One
in
of them
political
just
campaigns.
one of them just walked over the laptop,
Oh, your
minimized
cat.
minimized the screen so I couldn't see you, and is now poking his head around the corner of the laptop. He just tried to scratch me with a claw. He is not far off shutting the lid. So if you're worried about going on for too long, there is
Oh,
another
he's oh
one
he's
who
gonna
wants
end
to
it.
stop you. But
That's
Prof,
the thing. Well, we live with carnivores, you and I, like
yeah,
with cats and dogs, or at least the dogs are like omnivorous. And so I often think that my dog Elliot, he's for animal rights, but probably not farmed animal rights, like just dog animal rights. So your
speaking
cats may also want to shut this down, this
about
conversation, because
as a
they're like, no,
protest,
I want my fish, lady.
well,
But that's the thing. I think it's fine if other animals in the world do their own hunting, but once we domesticate dogs and cats and then we have to dictate who gets killed to feed them, who's sacrificed for our companion animals, it's morally exhausting and upsetting to be put in that situation, which I am in and lots of people are. And so, yeah, it's very difficult.
Ingrid Newkirk is another survivor of the podcast, by the way,
Oh,
one of
great.
the co-founder of People for the
Of
Ethical
people.
Treatment of Animals.
Yes.
Prof, I wanted to ask you about another book that you did where one of your co-editors is also a survivor of the podcast, the estimable Nuria Almiron. And
Oh, from Barcelona.
yes, this is Critical Animal and Media Studies, Communication for Non-Human Animal Advocacy. Could you tell us about Critical Animal and Media Studies, both the book and the domain?
Yeah, basically, it's kind of a clunky sounding word. So even though I'm part of this, movement, I don't always use the term critical animal and media studies. But basically, we were combining critical animal studies, which is a broad field that the way I've been talking is kind of in that critical animal studies vein, which is the academic version of animal rights, basically, or critical race theory, or some kind of critical feminism. But it's applying it to other animals. It's a total liberation of species movement
Hmm.
of critical animal studies. But then you have critical media studies, and Toby, I think that's part of your area as well. And so we're media studies scholars. It was Nuria Almiron and then Matthew Cole, although he's a sociologist, and myself. And so, but we all are looking at media texts and, and public relations and lobbying and news and entertainment and all these things. But we're taking a critical standpoint on it in terms of how other animals are represented or not represented in this. And so we were just bringing that together for the first time. So that book by Rutledge was really the first time we introduced the term critical animal and media studies, even though people have been doing this kind of thing in lots of different, fields, because media is a very common thing to critique and study in academia, obviously. And then people in philosophy and all kinds of areas have always kind of, not as many people, but taken a concern for animals other than humans and kind of the way that they're represented. But I do remember back when I was first in grad school as a master's student in the early 2000s, I was having trouble writing literature reviews because it was new to me, right? You have to write a literature review before your paper that summarizes all the stuff that's been written about for what you're about to study. And I'm like, nothing, almost nothing. And I was like, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to fill this up? And so I also then would take work, that was also advocating for marginalized humans or not othering other individuals. And kind of media ethics and different things like that and apply it because there was so little scholarship. And now I tend to quote myself a lot, which I think is kind of pathetic, but I'm just like, who's written about this? I have, so
Well, you're the guest today, and it is meant to be about you. So I wondered if we could move on now as we begin to come to a conclusion to your 2020 volume, The Human Animal Earthling Identity.
oh yeah. I'm laughing because I see your cat pawing at your chest right now. Better than closing the computer on us. Yeah, so this book was me kind of moving away from just focusing so much on the farmed animal issues that I did for my master's thesis and for my dissertation, and just recognizing that the animal rights movement, just like so many other nonprofit movements, they need allies, like that we need to all band together because a lot of times, like when we talked about how unjust the factory farming and industrial farming systems are and commercial fishing, it's like the human rights movement shouldn't be working on that alone. And then the environmental movement doesn't need to be working on that commercial fishing problem alone, nor does the animal rights movement. Like we should be working together. So, and I thought it would just, there'd be strength in numbers and the idea that a lot of times we have common, I don't really want to say enemies, but opponents or like the people, the powerful entities that we're going up against to leverage change, it's the same groups, right? Like, so instead of us each going up with our little campaigns to ask for change, shouldn't we work together in the human rights movement and the animal rights movement and the environmental movement? So I looked at, I think there might have been like 18 different organizations across that are like global organizations. So it could be like World Wildlife Fund and Amnesty International and Greenpeace and groups like that. So similar to my other book, I'm looking, okay, what do they say in their campaigns? And I'm making lists, like so many lists of all these values that they're promoting. And then I compared the values from the animal protection campaigns and the environmental campaigns and the human rights campaigns and where they overlapped. I created a list of values that are the human animal earthling identity. And I grouped them according to values that support life, values that support fairness, and values that support responsibility and then also unity. Those are the categories. And then I made a plea that when you're building campaigns and you're appealing to these common values, then you also should frame them in such a way that you're not making it so narrow to just your particular stakeholder, which is especially done in the human rights movement because I mean, understandably, they're the ones that are focused on the least number of species, right? Like the environmental movement has everyone, and the animal protection movement has humans and other animals. But the idea would be that you don't like throw some other movement or entity under the bus while you're trying to help out your marginalized group or your victim. And so, because sometimes by not even acknowledging that someone else is involved, like if you are talking about slaughterhouse workers, the human workers and their awful conditions and unsafe conditions, grotesque, dangerous place to work, you would be remiss if you didn't mention that there's like what makes it also disgusting is because all these pigs and chickens they're just being murdered And so, like, if you don't mention that also as a problem, you're basically saying no one should care about the pigs and chickens. You should only care about the humans. And conversely, for an animal rights campaign that's a vegan campaign, we shouldn't ignore the ways that humans are disadvantaged by our food system as well. So it's just a way to say, even if you're advocating for one particular campaign and group and it's a single issue, you can still be respectful in thinking about and mentioning the other entities and living beings who are also affected, and maybe finding ways to partner up with other groups because we really need all hands on deck here. I mean, because with the extinction crisis and the climate crisis and so much violence, human caused violence in the world, like we really need to work together, a lot of these nonprofit groups against these very profitable industries that are exploiting everyone and degrading the planet.
Profitable, but as you say, with massive public subvention along the way.
Mm.
The Farm Bill in the United States, possibly the most corrupt piece of legislation
Ugh.
in world history, is the biggest doonboggle in public policy around the world. By the way, Prof, as you can see, naranja, orange, is
Oh yeah.
is quite difficult. This is interesting. He never allows me to interview red-headed women. He
Yeah.
actually will draw blood from me if I'm talking to red-headed women online. And you're a brunette, but you've got a red slash maroon colored t-shirt on, I think.
Yes.
And
I'm
it
like wearing
could
an
be that this
herbivore
is
shirt.
getting his masculine jealousy going. I don't
It's
know.
because he's a tabby cat and he wants to be the most beautiful red-furred animal.
And and
I should Naranjo, you are the most beautiful person in the room. In the Zoom, I should say.
well,
Yes.
he is, 80% of them are male orange cats.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Oh,
and about 75% of calico ones are female. There's this weird genetic
huh.
twist in them that's
Yeah.
was disclosed in part by some Japanese citizen scientists only last year that just piled in with information about their cats and
Yeah.
was discovered that there is this extraordinary thing. Anyway,
It is wonderful to live with, dogs and cats or other animals because, I mean, just to see their beauty up close every day, their eyes and their fur, and I mean, they're just so much prettier than we are. There's just no two ways about it.
yeah,
I mean, like,
they're
they're
incredible.
gorgeous.
And they
Yeah.
also have, I mean, cats in particular, astounding agility
Oh, gosh.
mixed with abominable clumsiness. Anyway, Prof, getting back to what you were saying, this is a very, very important book. And I've got one more question for you, if I may, which
Yeah.
is about other published work you've done. And then I'd like, once you've answered that, I'd love for you to add anything you want. That might take the form of going over terrain we've already covered, but where you want to say something more, or it might take the form of entirely new material, such as
Yeah.
your current research.
Okay.
And my last question, Prof, is about something you do with Professor Deborah Merskin, which is to provide guidelines for reporters about how to write about animals.
Right. The animalsandmedia.org website that we have. So, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry I interrupted you in case you
No,
wanted
no,
to ask
no,
something.
that's
Oh,
exactly what I'm hoping you'll talk about, Prof.
oh, yeah. I think this was an example of just when you're in academia and you're writing about these things and you're making recommendations at the end of all these papers and book chapters, suddenly you're realizing I don't think the practitioners in the world who do make media, who make advertisements, who do PR campaigns, who are journalists or filmmakers, they're probably not having access to this, even if you try to make it open access like I have. But so let's take some of our recommendations and build a style guideline.
Mm,
And it's very odd that ours seems to be the only or largest or most extensive one that I can find, at least in English, although maybe somebody has come along because this has been 10 years now that we've had the animalsandmedia.org. I'm also thinking we're at a point where I actually think Deb Merskin and I should have a group like Sentient Media or something take over it because we as just professors who aren't part of an organization, we don't have our own nonprofit or funding, we can't really promote it as much. So I don't know that it makes as big of a difference as I'd like it to because we have also a list of experts on there who can speak to animal issues from the non-human animals perspective. And so not just a human-centered perspective on all these things. But yeah, so we have what are we think respectful guidelines to be more accurate when you're talking about other animals and the activists and people and issues that surround them. And so, like, to not just take things for granted, like that a farmed animal should be farmed or should be referred to by the euphemisms that the industry uses, that you're a dairy cow or you're beef or you're poultry or something. That's not actually who they are. That's how they're being used and exploited. So the news is actually, and so much of our culture is speciesist, if you've heard that term, like sexist or racist. It's a kind of discrimination that favors the human. And so a lot of times I think our news don't even know that they're doing that. It's like so common to privilege the status quo use of other animals and to not question it, that we're saying, no, you need to question it. And so you need to bring in people every time you're talking about animal research or something to question, not just be like, gee whiz, what did they discover? But should we be doing this? So to expand that. So I'm hoping that activists or anybody who's writing a corporation about an advertising campaign or writing a filmmaker or posting on a social media page, for a filmmaker or a letter to the editor for a news outlet, if there's something about other animals and they want to make a constructive point, they can refer to our animalsandmedia.org guidelines and hope that that organization, that media maker group, will have some discussions in their staff room about these guidelines. I don't know that they'll agree with them, but I want them to discuss it and just even think, how do we, talk about animals? And in particular, we were also trying to get the Associated Press in the main entity in the United States that does the news style guideline to update their animal guidelines to never have anybody describe another individual, a gendered individual, as it, because it's objectifying to someone who has a gender, or you can even just say they. You don't have to be gendered, but you don't want to be objectifying. So, and I was just thinking about this too, because so far the campaign was unsuccessful. We were doing it with In Defense of Animals, that group, and they're the ones that really got it going. And we got Dr. Jane Goodall, the late Dr. Jane Goodall, who just recently passed away, unfortunately for the world. She gave her good name to putting to the campaign. So now I'm thinking we should go back to pressure the Associated Press. Like, remember Jane Goodall wanted you to do this in 2021 and you still haven't done it? Why don't you do it in her honor? I haven't made the time to guilt them into it, but that's something I'm thinking about doing.
And finally, Prof, is there something you'd like to add? As I said a moment ago, it could be entirely new material, or it might be something that touches on a domain we've already traversed.
I know your cat is wanting to get your attention, so I can't make this too lengthy. But yeah, I will say I'm moving also in the wildlife, the compassionate conservation direction. And so I've started because if I think about also what is the biggest and most urgent thing in the world, to me, the extinction of species, or just the even when species aren't going extinct, just the fact that they can't thrive in this world. Most wildlife cannot thrive in this world. And so we're digging everyone's grave through the human activities, especially in industrialized nations. So I've started focusing on wildlife coexistence, and I was really inspired by Wilson's Half Earth project and his book Half Earth, about the fact and the whole kind of 50 by 50 conservation initiatives that the UN promotes, where so many countries around the world are saying, yeah, we're going to find ways to give half of our land and sea uh, territories, in our country to wildlife habitat. That doesn't mean that humans have zero, you know, that we're not involved in those territories in any way, but that we're making them wildlife friendly in places where wildlife can thrive and make it a corridor. Because right now wildlife are just fragmented around the world, and so they're interbreeding and not thriving in their little pockets that we've allowed them to have, where we humans bought something, since everything on the planet has to be human owned apparently, and then we might give it to some animals in the form of a park, but there's not enough parks. So with our public and private land, we need to make it wildlife friendly. So I'm focusing now on wildlife coexistence. And so I guess I would just ask people to open up their minds and some time and space to considering all the other species whenever they're doing anything, when they're writing their Congress people or their parliamentarians, and when they're in their classes teaching or when they're writing about anything, don't continue to ignore all these other species, because the more we do that, we're just reinforcing that it's a human world. It only matters what we do. Climate change is just about our grandchildren and stuff. It's not just about our grandchildren. It's about, all other species and their kids and offspring. And so I feel like we just need to have some humility and expand our identities to see ourselves as human animal earthlings. And if so many people were doing that, we would make such a big difference, and we would give the politicians permission to focus on other animals. But as long as they don't hear that much about them, or they hear about the odd kind of cruelty case or something, but if they don't really hear that we want a systemic change in our society away from speciesist and oppressive uh, laws and rules and systems, if then, they're never going to change anything. And it can't just be the animal rights movement who's doing that. It has to really be wide, a critical mass of people. And that means everyone listening here.
Professor Carrie P. Freeman, thank you so much for being with us today, for tolerating my terpsichorees with my feline companions,
I
and
love that they're here.
for sharing so much with us. I did see your roommate on the move a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah, he's in his big fluffy bed on the floor now because he likes to go to bed at like 9 o'clock, and that's what time it is here. He thinks I stay up way too late and I'm on my computer way too much, and I agree with him.
It's been wonderful chatting to you. Your work is terrific, and it's an honor for you to come into the pod. Thank you so
Well,
much.
it's an honor to be interviewed by you. You're very prolific and you give so much of yourself, and you've made such an impact in the world. And I'm very honored that you spent time talking to me and you gave me a platform. Thank you very much.